It was back in 2020, during the pandemic's peak chaos, that I began driving for Uber just to make ends meet. My retail job had laid me off, and I urgently needed income. Rideshare work means encountering all sorts of people, especially on the late nights I was working. There were awkward situations, drunk riders, odd conversations, but none compared to what unfolded one Friday night in October. It was a little past midnight, and I'd just dropped off a passenger at a hotel on the outskirts of town. Almost immediately, my app pinged with a new request. The pickup was about 6 minutes away, outside a bowling alley in a strip mall, pretty standard. The ride was for someone named Derek. I accepted it and started driving over. When I arrived, the area felt quiet, lit only by a few dim parking lot lights. No cars were visible, and the bowling alley looked closed. However, a lone figure stood under one of the lights, clad in a grey hoodie and jeans. He was tall, perhaps 6'2", hands in pockets, head down as if staring at his shoes. As I pulled up, he glanced at me but didn't wave or move. I lowered my window and asked, "You, Derek?" He gave a slow nod, walked over, and got into the back seat behind me. I started the trip, asking if the destination listed in the app was correct, an address about 20 minutes away in a residential area I didn't know well. He quietly confirmed, "Yeah, that's right." I recall thinking his voice sounded a bit unusual. Not drunk or high, just flat and emotionless. Though I didn't dwell on it then. I began driving, but he remained silent for the next 5 or 6 minutes. Glancing at him in the rearview mirror periodically, I noticed he was staring straight ahead, seemingly fixed on the back of my head, not looking out the window or at his phone. I tried breaking the silence by asking how his night was going. He paused before replying, just needed to get out of there. When I asked where, he simply said, "Doesn't matter." So, I didn't press further. We drove on for a while. About 15 minutes into the trip, I realized we were nearing the destination, which was in a very isolated part of town, characterized by no streetlights, large yards, and numerous trees. As we approached the address, he suddenly leaned forward, pointing. "Actually, can you pull into that driveway right there?" he requested, indicating a house on the right. The house was dark, with no lights on, inside or out, looking old and genuinely abandoned. Its lawn was overgrown, and the paint on the siding was peeling. Furthermore, there was no car in the driveway. "Is this your place?" I asked. "Just pull in," he replied. I hesitated but obeyed, turning into the driveway. I stopped near the front of the house and put the car in park. He didn't exit immediately. I glanced back and asked, "Everything all right?" He stared at the front door and commanded, "Wait here." Then he got out and started walking toward the house. He didn't head for the front door. Instead, he walked around the side of the building and vanished from view. I sat there for perhaps 2 minutes, unsure of what to do. The ride was still active, and I didn't want to drive off and get penalized, yet something felt wrong. My intuition warned me this passenger wasn't simply going inside to retrieve something. Eventually, I manually ended the trip in the app. I marked it as complete and started to back out of the driveway. But before I could shift into reverse, he reappeared, walking quickly back toward the car. His hands were empty, and his expression was strange, a mix of anger and excitement. I unlocked the doors, not wanting to provoke a confrontation, but an instinct screamed at me not to let him back in. He opened the rear door, got in, and said, "Take me to the other place." I asked what other place. Just drive. I'll tell you, he said. You need to put it in the app, I insisted. He didn't answer, just stared at me in the mirror. I can't take you anywhere unless you put it in the app, I repeated. He remained silent for a few seconds, then directed me to drive back to where I'd picked him up. Not wanting to argue further, I began heading back toward the strip mall. The entire journey back was fraught with tension. He didn't speak, but I felt his gaze on me. The hairs on my arms were standing up. He continued staring at the back of my head. I tried lightening the mood, saying, "Rough night," he replied. "You could say that." I asked if everything was all right, and he answered, "Not yet." I asked no more questions. When we returned to the strip mall, I parked under the same light where I'd picked him up. Before I could speak, he leaned forward and asked, "You ever wonder how you're going to die?" I froze. I laughed awkwardly and said, "Not really something I think about." He didn't laugh. He simply leaned back and, after a moment, said, "I think about it all the time." Then he opened the door and got out without another word. He didn't close it immediately, remaining halfway in and out of the car for a second. He looked at me and stated, "You picked the wrong guy up tonight." He shut the door and walked off into the darkness behind the bowling alley. I sat there, too shaken to move, for a full minute. Finally, I drove home, constantly checking my mirrors. Once home, I checked the trip details again. Something was amiss. The name was no longer Derek. It was blank. There was no name, no profile picture, no trip history. It was as if the ride had never occurred. I contacted Uber support to report it, but they informed me the trip data was unavailable, suggesting it sometimes happens if the app crashes or the rider cancels midway. But I knew what I saw. I knew I'd completed the trip. I knew the man had gotten in and out of my car and spoken those words. "You picked the wrong guy up tonight." I never saw him again, and I hope I never do. Still, every time I get a request in a dimly lit parking lot or have a silent passenger in the back seat, I remember that night. And I remember that feeling that something truly terrible could have happened. Perhaps he changed his mind at the last second, or maybe he never intended to do anything, just wanted to scare someone. But I still wonder what he meant and if he ever found the right car. Story 2 *. This occurred in 2021 when I was driving for Uber full-time. I live in a city that sees a lot of tourists, especially in the summer. So rideshare gigs could be decent money if you were consistent. I primarily worked nights, partly because I'm a night owl, and partly because there was less traffic and potentially better tips from drunk passengers heading back from bars. The night this happened, it was around 1:30 in the morning, a fairly typical Saturday night crowd. I had just dropped off a group of college students who had been loud, so I was relieved to get a request that looked quieter. The name indicated Chris, and the pickup location was a small side street just off downtown. The unusual aspect was the pin's location in an odd area not near bars or apartments, more like the backlot of an old strip mall. But I figured it might just be a poor GPS marker. That happens sometimes. I drove over and saw a man standing at the corner, wearing a hoodie and jeans, staring down at his phone. I pulled up and said, "Chris." He nodded and got into the back seat with little conversation. He didn't smell of alcohol, nor did he slur his words. He seemed sober, just exceptionally quiet. He didn't say hello or respond when I asked how his night was going. Some people are just not talkers, so I didn't think much of it. I started the ride, and the drop-off was on the opposite side of town, 25 minutes away in a suburban neighborhood I'd only been to once or twice. It was dark out there, with no streetlights in some areas, making it quite isolated. About 5 minutes into the trip, I noticed Chris had his phone out, but he wasn't texting or calling. He was holding it flat in his lap with the flashlight on, aiming the beam slightly upward toward my seat. I asked him, half joking, "Everything all right back there?" He just mumbled, "Yeah," and then turned the flashlight off. The next 20 minutes were utterly silent, marked only by the hum of the engine and a strange tension building in the car. I can't quite describe it, but something about Chris felt off. He wasn't threatening, but definitely unsettled, as if he wasn't entirely present. We arrived at the neighborhood, and I followed the GPS to the house. But as we pulled up, I saw it was completely dark, no porch light, no interior lights, nothing. "Is this the right place?" I asked. Chris didn't answer. He just sat there. I turned around. "Hey, is this it?" I asked a bit louder. He stared past me out the window. I repeated myself one final time, and finally he nodded. So I put the car in park and said, "Have a good night." He didn't move. He just sat there. "Are you good?" I asked again. He finally reached for the handle and stepped out, but he didn't close the door. He stood outside the car with the door open, facing the house. I waited. A few seconds passed, then 20, then a full minute. I was about to say something when he suddenly turned around, looked at me through the open door, and said, "I need to go back." I blinked. "Back where?" I asked. "Where you picked me up." He replied, his tone flat and devoid of emotion. I couldn't simply reverse a 25-minute trip. I told him he'd have to request a new ride, but he just stared at me. He pleaded, "Please, I need to go back." I told him again, "You need to request it through the app." It was then he said something that sent chills up my spine. "I can't," he said. "They're not gone yet." My only response was, "Who's not gone?" He didn't answer, merely stood there holding the open door. I noticed he was breathing heavily. At that point, I felt seriously uncomfortable. "Look," I said, "I can't just start a new ride unless you request it." He stared for another moment, then slowly backed away and closed the door. He walked toward the house, even though it was pitch black and seemed deserted. I waited until he reached the porch before pulling off. The moment I turned the corner, I ended the trip in the app and started driving back toward downtown. A couple of blocks down, I stopped at a 24-hour gas station to use the bathroom and get a drink. I parked at the side of the building, went inside, and returned maybe 4 minutes later. And when I got back to my car, my mind felt like it short-circuited. Chris was sitting in the back seat, wearing the same hoodie and the same expression. I thought I had locked the doors before going inside, but somehow he was back there. I opened the driver's side door and got back in slowly, keeping an eye on him in the mirror. "How did you get back in?" I asked. He simply said, "Take me back." I said, "I'm calling the cops," and reached for my phone. That's when he leaned forward close enough for me to hear his breath and said, "They're still in the house. I don't know why, but I didn't call the police." Something about the way he said that made me feel like he was having some kind of episode. I played along and said, "Whose house is that?" "My parents," he replied. I asked if he lived there, and he said, "Not anymore." That made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. I started slowly driving back to where I'd picked him up. Every part of me screamed not to do it, but I didn't know what else to do. As we got closer, he started breathing heavier. He was rocking slightly in the back seat. At one point, he whispered, "They're still there. They won't leave, no matter what I do." When we pulled up to the house, it was still dark, with no signs of habitation. He got out without saying anything, walked up to the front door, and stood there. He didn't knock. He just stood still. I waited about 30 seconds, then pulled away again, making sure the doors were locked this time. I drove 3 blocks, parked under a streetlight, and sat there for 10 minutes, trying to process what had just happened. I debated calling the cops, but what could I even say? That a guy got into my car twice and said weird things. There was technically no crime, so I just drove home and didn't sleep that night. The next day, I reported the ride to Uber, though I regretted not reporting it to the police, because the man might have needed help. He could have been sick. I hope he didn't hurt anyone. Who knows if that house was even really his parents' house, or if he was just having a manic episode. Story 3 *, I was 18 at the time. A girl living alone in my apartment with my dog. My place is about 8 miles out of town, so getting food delivered could sometimes be a hassle. I never really thought much about Uber Eats being unsafe. I figured those stories wouldn't happen to me, or at least, that's what I thought. It was a Friday evening. I was cleaning my apartment, getting it ready for my boyfriend to come over. We're a long distance, so I only see him on weekends, and I always try to have the place cleaned up before he arrives on Saturday. I'd been cleaning for about 2 hours, and it was past 6 p.m., so I was feeling hungry. I didn't want to dirty any dishes, since I'd just cleaned them all and tidied the kitchen. I decided to order food so I wouldn't have to make a mess. I placed my order and got the notification that my driver was on his way, driving a white Honda Fit Sport. I'm a young girl living on my own, so I have my delivery instructions set for contactless delivery, leaving the order at the door. I was sitting in my living room watching TV when I received the notification that my food had been delivered. As soon as I saw it, I jumped up, eager to get my food. I was starving. When I opened the door to grab it, it wasn't there. I figured maybe he'd left it at the wrong door, but looking down, none of the doors had the food. So I went back inside, ready to message the driver, when I heard a knock at my door. It was my next door neighbor holding my food. "Hey," he said, "sorry. I picked up your food from your driver because he was looking through your windows, and I wasn't sure what he was doing." I took the food, thanked him, and wondered what the hell had just happened. I went back in, ate my food, and watched a movie. When I started getting ready for bed, I took a shower, then turned off my TV and checked that all my doors were locked before going to bed. I lay down in bed, called my boyfriend, and eventually fell asleep. I woke up a few times during the night because my dog was growling at the window or the back door. My dog isn't a huge, scary dog. He's a small 5-pound Maury, but it's still pretty scary when he growls unexpectedly. I finally calmed him down and got him to go back to sleep. It wasn't even 15 minutes later that I woke up to banging on my window. My dog went crazy, barking, growling, and even whimpering. I couldn't move. I pulled the bed sheets over my head, leaving just enough to see out, and called the police, whispering into the phone. I explained to the operator that someone was in my backyard and that my window didn't lock properly, so it could easily be lifted. She told me to go to a different room, assuring me police would be at my apartment shortly. I ran to my kitchen, grabbed a knife, and waited. wanting to see blue and red lights or hear sirens. It felt like forever. I looked out the kitchen window and couldn't believe what I saw. The Uber driver's car, the white Honda Fit Sport, was parked across the street from my apartment. When you open the door to my apartment, there's a large open field to the left used for parking trailers and letting dogs play. He was parked there, but I didn't see anyone in the car. I put two and two together. He's in my backyard, I thought. The police finally arrived. I could barely speak. I was shaking and crying. I explained what happened to one officer, while another went to check my backyard, where my bedroom window is. Another officer checked his car, which was still in the field, but he wasn't in it. The two officers returned and spoke with the first officer, telling her there were footprints in my backyard. It had just rained, so the ground was very muddy outside. I started panicking when I heard that, not just because that's what you don't want to hear, but also because if he wasn't arrested by the cops and wasn't in his car, where was this guy? My neighbor came outside to see what was going on. The officers explained the situation to him. He mentioned picking up my food earlier that day. The neighbor invited me to sleep over at his place for the night if it made me feel better. Oddly, I declined the offer. After the police left, I went back into my apartment, thinking it was all over. It took me a few hours to feel comfortable enough to fall asleep. But at 2 a.m., I woke up to banging on my front door and heard police. There's no way this is happening right now, I thought. I got up, scared to open the door, and it was the same female officer. She explained they had stayed hidden to watch for the guy in case he returned, and he had. They caught him walking up to my front door, thinking he might try to find a way in. My heart sank hearing that. She then explained he was arrested and I didn't have to worry about him anymore. I thanked her and tried to go back to sleep, but couldn't. I also no longer use Uber Eats when I'm home alone. Story for asterisk, I was 26 at the time, male. I was in Washington, D.C. on what felt like a vacation, visiting my then fiancée, whom I'll call Sarah for this story. I was there for her basic training graduation. It was a big deal for her family, and she asked me to be there for it, so I booked the flight. I arrived about a week before the rest of her family, so Sarah and I had some time just to ourselves before she'd be busy with her family's arrival. She stayed with me at my hotel during that week. Eventually, we decided to explore some of the nearby historical sites that Washington has to offer. Since I'd never been there, the idea interested me, and we went for it. After arriving at our starting point, we spent about 4 hours walking around, seeing all the sights from the Lincoln Memorial to the Washington Monument, the Congress Building, and even the White House. It was genuinely a fun and exciting experience for me, especially since I'd missed out on a school trip there in high school. Sarah seemed to appreciate my interest too, and we really had a good time together. After we decided we'd seen enough walking and were ready to head back to the hotel, we used the Uber app to call a ride. We'd used it earlier to get there and hadn't had any issues, so we figured we'd just use it again for the ride back. Sarah made the request on her phone while I sat down in the shade and waited. I was pretty tired from all the walking, and I just wanted to get back to the hotel for a long-needed nap. Eventually, after about 10 minutes of waiting, a car pulled up along the side of the road where we were. It wasn't a typical spot for a car to stop. Sarah motioned that this was the car, and I stood up, following her to it. She opened the back door and asked the man inside Uber for Sarah. He gave a slight nod without speaking. I followed her into the car and shut the door behind me. Looking back, I realize now how foolish both Sarah and I were. We should have asked for the driver's name and confirmed the car matched the one shown in the app. I didn't have access to that information myself, and since Sarah had made the request on her phone, it just didn't occur to me at the time to do any of that, as we both sat in the back of the car, which was a grey-coloured minivan. The driver didn't speak to us. I found this a bit odd. Any other driver I'd ever had would at least greet me upon entry or confirm my name. But this man, nothing. He started driving without acknowledging either of us. Aside from the nod he gave when Sarah asked if he was our Uber, I did notice how strange it was. But since I was tired, I didn't feel like engaging with the man myself. I leaned my head back and just closed my eyes. Then, after what felt like only about 5 minutes into the drive, Sarah tapped my arm. I opened my eyes and looked at her. Her expression was one of worry, and it made me wonder what she was concerned about. She pointed to her phone, which was showing the route the Uber was supposed to take to get us back to our hotel. It didn't take me long to realize that the way we were going was not the way the route indicated. In fact, it was the opposite direction. I saw Sarah's face lose its color shortly after, when a notification popped up on her phone saying our Uber had arrived, followed by a message from the driver asking where we were. My heart sank into the pit of my stomach. That's when I realized how dumb we were for not verifying the car and driver before just getting in. I slowly looked back toward the driver, but didn't say anything. I didn't know what this man's intentions were or what he was capable of, and honestly, I didn't want to find out. I just knew in that moment I had to get both Sarah and myself out of that car. I leaned forward and told the man that we'd changed our minds and would be fine just being let out where we were, trying to get out of the situation without alarming him about what we knew. He glanced at me through the rearview mirror, the first actual acknowledgement of us he'd given since we got in, and stared at me without speaking, a gaze that felt like it lasted minutes but was probably only about 10 seconds. He didn't stop the car, though. He didn't say a word in response to me and just kept driving as if nothing had been said. My patience had worn thin, and I knew whatever this man had planned wasn't good. I then did the only thing I could think of at that moment. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my pocket knife, flipped the blade open, and told the driver, "I know you're not our Uber driver. I don't know what your plan is here or what you think you're going to do to us, but I have a knife, and if you don't pull this car over right now, I have no problem using it." The driver's eyes quickly looked back at me in the rearview mirror, and I knew he could see the knife firmly held in my hand. He quickly pulled the van over, and I heard the doors unlock. Sarah and I didn't waste any time getting out of that car as fast as we could. The moment we were both out, the man sped off. We quickly gathered ourselves for a moment as Sarah was having a panic attack. Then, Sarah quickly pulled out her phone and messaged our actual Uber driver, giving him our location and asking if he could come pick us up. The actual driver arrived within a few minutes, and this time, we made sure it was the right one. We told him everything that had happened, and it was then that he informed us something that sent a chill down my spine. He told us there had been multiple incidents recently in the area where people were posing as Uber drivers. It was an easy way to target tourists and people unfamiliar with the area who wouldn't think twice about getting into a car, thinking it was an Uber or Lyft. He mentioned that many people had gone missing, and they could only assume the worst. He told us both we were lucky we noticed when we did and hadn't gotten further away from our original pickup spot. That was probably the only reason the man let us go. And, of course, the fact that I was armed. We made it back to the hotel without further issue and quickly reported the incident to the police. We gave them the best description of the man and the car that we both could. The police told us they'd call us if they found anything out. We never heard back from them, so I assume the man was never caught or found, and that worries me. He could still be out there doing this to others. Again, I realized how stupid we both were after everything, for not verifying whose car it was we were getting into. But let this be a reminder to everyone listening. Do just that. Always verify your Uber drivers, and always be aware of your surroundings.